Have you ever felt completely alone, stranded, and certain no one could help, only for someone to appear out of nowhere? It was late afternoon, golden sunlight spilling across the highway, when Lila Summer's car gave one final shudder and came to a stop. Her wedding dress, once perfect, now clung to her in disheveled folds. Her bouquet slipped from her hands, petals scattering across the asphalt like tiny confessions of her panic. She scanned the empty road, heart pounding. Her groom's car had broken down behind her, leaving her completely alone, trapped between fear and duty. Then she saw it. A sleek black car gliding effortlessly through traffic, moving with a confidence that seemed to part the world itself. Its tinted windows reflected the sun, its polished frame exuding power and precision. Inside sat Julian Cross, 30, with neatly styled brown hair and sharp green eyes. To the world, he was untouchable, a billionaire whose life was built on numbers, deals, and control. But beneath the perfect exterior, there was a quiet emptiness, a longing no amount of success could fill. And his eyes found her, Lila, stranded on the side of the highway, trembling in her dress, clutching nothing but fear. Without hesitation, Julian brought the car to the curb. She looked up, startled, and for a single moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "Your car?" he asked, his voice calm but unexpectedly gentle. It broke down," Lila whispered, barely audible. I don't know what to do." He didn't glance at his watch or weigh his options. "Then get in," Julian said. For a woman trapped by duty and a man trapped by his own emptiness, a simple offer, a ride, was about to change everything. And before we continue, I have to ask, where in the world are you watching this story right now? Drop your city in the comments. I'd love to see how far this moment is reaching. Little did they know, this broken down car would mark the start of a journey neither expected, one full of courage, love, and the twist of fate. As the black car merged back onto the highway, Lila kept her hands tightly clasped in her lap, staring out the window but seeing nothing. The hum of the engine filled the silence between them, a quiet rhythm that made her heartbeat feel louder than ever. No one knew the truth behind the trembling she had barely held together that morning. No one knew that this wedding, the dresses, the flowers, the carefully crafted smiles, was not the celebration of love she had dreamed of. It was a promise she hadn't chosen, a sacrifice she was making to save her family from debts she couldn't solve on her own. Her father's voice still echoed in her mind. "You're the only one who can do this, Lila. We have no other choice." She had wanted to scream, to fight, to run away, but every time she imagined leaving, guilt tightened around her chest like a vice. She couldn't abandon them, not when they needed her. Julian glanced at her from the corner of his eye, careful not to stare too long, but there was something about the way she held herself, fragile yet defiant, that made him pause. He wasn't used to seeing people like this, people whose strength came from quiet endurance rather than power or wealth. "Are you heading to your wedding?" he asked gently, breaking the silence. Lila's lips pressed into a thin line, and she nodded slowly. "Yes, but it's complicated," she murmured. He didn't push. Instead, he drove with steady hands, letting her decide how much she wanted to share. She finally exhaled, a soft whisper that seemed to carry a lifetime of fear and responsibility. I don't love him. I can't. But I have to because my family, they have no one else. If I refuse, everything falls apart." Julian felt a tightness in his chest, an unfamiliar pang of empathy. He had encountered wealth, power, and influence, but nothing had ever made him pause like this. This wasn't about money. This was about a human being, trying to survive the impossible. The road stretched ahead, endless and uncertain. But in that moment, Lila's quiet courage illuminated everything. It was raw, imperfect, and yet undeniably beautiful. Little did Lila know, this journey with a stranger in a black car would soon become the turning point that changed her life forever. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, sunlight glinting off the polished hood of Julian's car. Inside, the air was heavy with unspoken words. Lila sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the passing trees and asphalt. Julian's eyes flicked to her occasionally, not with curiosity alone, but with something he hadn't felt in years: concern. He had a meeting tonight, a gala filled with influential faces, cameras flashing and people praising deals he had long since mastered. Every minute mattered. Time was a commodity he spent carefully. And yet, he couldn't ignore her. The way her shoulders trembled, the subtle quiver of her lips, the sadness that clung to her like a shadow. For a moment, Julian considered ignoring it. He could drive past, let the traffic swallow her, and continue on to his perfectly planned evening. That would have been rational. That would have been safe. But he couldn't. Something inside him refused. He studied her quietly. Lila Summers, 25, trapped in a life she hadn't chosen, carrying burdens no one should ever bear at her age. There was fragility to her, yes, but also a strength that defied despair. Every instinct in him told him to turn away, yet every heartbeat whispered otherwise. "Lila," he finally said, his voice low and steady, breaking the silence that had stretched too long. "I know we just met, but I can help you. You don't have to face this alone." She blinked, startled. I can't ask you to do that," she whispered. "You're not asking," he said, eyes locked on the road, hands firm on the wheel. "I'm choosing to. That's different." Her breath caught. It wasn't often anyone offered her help without an expectation, without a hidden motive. Julian wasn't offering charity or control. He was offering presence. As the car carried them forward, Julian's mind wandered. He had always measured life in outcomes. Profits, contracts, victories. Personal connections were secondary, distractions at best, complications at worst. And yet, as he watched Lila stare silently out the window, he realized how empty those victories had been. He had wealth, power, influence, but he had never felt this tug at his chest, this urge to protect, to stand for someone else. The traffic thinned as the city faded behind them, leaving only open road and the quiet hum of the engine. Julian's voice cut gently through the tension. "You don't have to face what's coming alone," he repeated. "Whatever happens at your wedding, you have a choice. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Lila turned slightly, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was no judgment, no expectation, only sincerity. Her own heart stirred in response. For the first time that day, she felt seen, not as a duty, not as a problem, but as a person. And then, almost instinctively, Julian asked, "Do you want to drive you there, or do you want to get out?" Her voice trembled, but she spoke the truth. I don't know. I feel trapped." Julian nodded, understanding more than she knew. "Then stay with me. We'll figure out together." The words were simple, but the weight of them hung in the car like a promise. It was rare to make a decision without calculation, without strategy, without expecting a return. Rare for Julian. But he had made it anyway. And as the car continued along the quiet highway, the story paused for a moment. Not in the real world, but here, for those watching. It's the kind of choice that changes everything. A small act of courage that sets the wheels of fate in motion. So tell me, if you were in Lila's shoes, would you step into a stranger's car when the world had left you stranded? Or would you stay alone, hoping someone else might come along? Comment below. I want to hear what you would do. Little did Julian know, that single decision, to stop, to speak, to offer help, would set in motion a chain of events that neither of them could ever have predicted. A decision that would test courage, reveal hearts, and perhaps even bring the love they hadn't dared to hope for. The hum of the engine was the only sound at first. Lila's hands remained folded in her lap, her fingers twisting the edges of her wedding dress nervously. The world outside the car blurred into streaks of sunlight and shadow, but inside, time seemed suspended. Julian's eyes flicked toward her from the corner of the side mirror, taking in the slight tremble of her shoulders, the subtle tension in her jaw. He wasn't used to noticing these things, not in boardrooms, not in gala events, not in the polished worlds he inhabited. But now, every detail about her seemed to matter. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," he said finally, his voice calm, low enough to soothe without intruding. Lila shook her head, though a faint smile touched her lips. "It's strange. I've never spoken to a stranger like this before." "Not like this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian's lips curved slightly, almost a smile. Maybe strangers aren't always what we think. Maybe they're just people who haven't scared you yet. She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw the sincerity in his green eyes. No judgment, no expectation, just attention. And for the first time that day, Lila felt a small ember of relief flicker inside her chest. The highway stretched before them, long and quiet, as if the world had emptied itself just for this ride. Julian drove with steady hands, his mind quiet but alert. He didn't need to fill the silence. It had its own weight, its own rhythm. Finally, Lila spoke again, voice hesitant. I don't even know where to start. Everything feels wrong. I should be happy, shouldn't I? It's my wedding day. But I'm not. Julian listened, really listened. He had heard many confessions before, clients, colleagues, even strangers in passing. But none had ever carried this weight, not this raw vulnerability. Then start wherever you need to, he said softly. I'm listening. She swallowed hard, took a breath, and began to share about her family, the pressure she carried, the way she had been forced into a marriage she didn't want. She spoke in fragment at first, as if fearing the full truth might shatter her completely. But Julian didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions. He just let her words fill the space between them. It was strange how quickly trust could form between strangers when there was nothing to gain or lose. Lila found herself revealing more than she ever had before. Her hopes, her fears, the tiny dreams she'd buried to keep her family safe. And Julian, he found himself feeling things he hadn't allowed in years. The tension in his chest, the quiet pull wanting to protect, to guide, to be present. He realized that wealth and power had never given him the satisfaction this moment brought. It was something far simpler, yet far more profound: connection. The road wound on, sunlight fading into soft shades of gold and amber, painting the horizon. Julian kept glancing at Lila, noticing the way her fingers fidgeted with a stray ribbon from her bouquet, the way her lips pressed together when she paused mid-sentence, the subtle way she drew strength from herself even when fear threatened to overtake her. And then, almost as if the universe knew they needed it, Julian asked, "Do you want to take a detour? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere you can breathe without thinking about what's waiting for you at the wedding." Lila's eyes widened slightly. "You do that for me?" "I'm not asking," he said, eyes focused on the road, but his voice steady and kind. "I'm telling. Sometimes you don't wait for permission." Her lips quivered, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. For a moment, she felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, the tension of obligation, the fear of disappointing everyone, the anxiety of being trapped. They all felt just a little less suffocating. For Lila and Julian, every mile they traveled together wasn't just moving them closer to a wedding that might never happen. It was moving them toward understanding, toward courage, and toward something neither of them expected. A bond that might change their lives forever. The sun was beginning to sink behind distant hills, casting a warm glow across the road. Inside the car, the hum of the tires on asphalt was steady, almost meditative. Lila sat quietly, glancing at Julian from the corner of her eye, wondering if she should say more, if she should let someone see the truth she had hidden for so long. Julian didn't push. He simply drove, letting the silence be a space where words could grow when they were ready. And soon, the words came. "I've never wanted this wedding," Lila whispered, barely audible. Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap, the bouquet ribbon now forgotten. I don't love him. I can't, but I have to. My family, they can't survive without me doing this. If I refuse, everything falls apart." Julian's grip on the wheel tightened slightly, not from anger, but from the weight of her confession. He had heard many stories of struggle, of sacrifice, but there was something about the quiet despair in her voice that made the world outside fade completely. "You've been carrying this alone," he said softly. "All this time, you've tried to keep everyone else's world together, even if it breaks yours." Lila swallowed hard, tears threatening to fall again. "I thought if I just smiled, did what I was told, everything would be okay. But it's not, and now I'm stuck." Julian glanced at her, and for the first time, his usually unreadable expression softened. "You're not stuck. Not really. There's always a choice, even when it feels impossible. Her blue eyes met his, full of fear, full of longing. I don't know how to choose, she admitted. I've been trained my whole life to obey, to sacrifice, to hide my feelings. What if I fail? You won't fail, Julian said firmly, because you're already brave. Bravery isn't about knowing exactly what to do. It's about standing up even when you're afraid. Lila's hands curled around the ribbon, her body tense. She had never spoken like this before, never let anyone see the weight she carried. And yet, in this stranger's presence, something shifted. There was safety here, and that small spark gave her courage she hadn't realized she still had. The car moved through golden light and shadow, winding roads that seemed endless, yet somehow intimate. Julian's voice broke the silence again. Tell me something, he said gently. If you could do anything at all, what would it be? Lila closed her eyes, imagining a life where her choices belonged to her. I'd live for myself. I'd be free. I'd love someone I wanted to love, not someone I was told to love. Julian nodded slowly, understanding more than she knew. Then maybe it's time to stop imagining and start choosing. And as the car carried them forward, the viewers' hearts might have been pounding too. Because here's the question. Have you ever been trapped between duty and desire? How would you break free if someone handed you a choice? Let me know in the comments below. In that moment, Julian realized that her heartbreak was not weakness. It was strength disguised in fear. And Lila realized that for the first time in her life, someone was listening. Someone truly understood. Someone offered a choice without judgment. The road stretched before them, endless possibilities ahead. And for the first time that day, the path didn't feel impossible. Little did they know, the honesty shared in these moments would ripple forward, shaping the decisions, the courage, and a connection that neither of them expected, but both desperately needed. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky into a canvas of pinks and oranges. The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon of possibility, yet Julian's mind was far from the road. He had driven countless miles in his life, through cities, across countries, chasing deals, deadlines, and accolades. But never had a drive felt like this. He glanced at Lila, silent now, her gaze lost in the horizon, the story she had shared, her sacrifices, her fear, the weight of a life she hadn't chosen, clung to him like a shadow he couldn't shake. For years, he had mastered the art of control. Every aspect of his life had been planned, measured, executed. Success had been the only metric that mattered. And yet, here he was powerless in a way that surprised him. Powerless to fix her world instantly. Powerless to erase the pain she carried. And yet, he felt compelled, drawn toward something far older and far simpler than deals or money. He had spent so long avoiding connection, afraid of the vulnerability it demanded. But watching Lila's courage, he realized that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was proof of life, of authenticity. Julian's thoughts drifted further, to his own life. How many nights had he spent alone in a penthouse suite, surrounded by luxury, yet feeling hollow? How many victories had he celebrated with champagne and applause, only to return to silence that pressed heavier than any pressure in a boardroom? He had amassed power, wealth, influence, but never love. Never someone who saw him, truly saw him, beyond the reputation, beyond the perfection. And now, sitting beside Lila, he wondered if he'd been searching all along, without knowing it. Her small admissions, the quiet bravery she carried, had cracked something in him, a part of himself he had buried beneath contracts and spreadsheets. He realized he longed not for conquest, but for honesty, not for control, but for connection. The car hummed on, passing trees painted gold by the fading sun. Julian's voice broke the silence, softer than he intended. Lila, what you're facing, it's unfair. You shouldn't have to choose between your family and your heart. And if you ever need someone to remind you that you have a choice, I'll be here. I don't know what comes next, but I do know that you don't have to face it alone. Lila's fingers twitched against the ribbon of her bouquet. She glanced at him, just for a moment, and Julian saw the mixture of hope and disbelief that so often accompanies someone learning that kindness can exist without expectation. And for a split second, He allowed himself to wonder, what if helping her didn't just change her life? What if it changed his too? As the horizon shifted from gold to dusky purple, Julian's thoughts turned outward, beyond the immediate road and traffic. He considered all the choices he had made in life, all the calculated moves that had brought him success, but had never brought him fulfillment. Perhaps the universe had arranged this chance, this roadside encounter, not just to offer her freedom, but to offer him something he hadn't even known he was missing. And here's a thought for everyone watching. Have you ever had a moment when someone else's struggle made you see your own life differently? Who changed the way you think about yourself? Share in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. The car continued forward, carrying them both along the winding path of possibility. Julian realized that he couldn't plan what would happen next, couldn't anticipate the twists or turns. But he didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, he felt the subtle thrill of letting life unfold on its own. And in the quiet hum of the tires on asphalt, something new began to stir, a connection neither of them had anticipated, one that would grow in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The road was quiet now, shadows stretching long across the asphalt as the evening approached. The city behind them faded into the distance, replaced by open landscapes, soft hills, and the golden glow of the setting sun. Inside the car, Lila and Julian were no longer strangers, yet words still hung lightly in the air, unspoken but understood. Lila's hands rested loosely on her lap, her fingers brushing the ribbon from her bouquet. She kept her eyes on the horizon, as if looking beyond the road could somehow make the weight on her shoulders lighter. Julian noticed, and for a moment, he simply watched. It was a rare thing for him, to observe someone without judgment, without expectation, without calculation. Then, almost instinctively, Julian reached into the small compartment by the console and handed her a bottle of water. "Here," he said softly. "You'll need this. You've been through a lot today, more than most people face in a lifetime." Lila blinked at him, a mixture of surprise and gratitude crossing her face. "Thank you," she murmured. Her voice sounded smaller than usual, almost like a secret being shared. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "It's nothing really. Sometimes the right thing to do is the simplest thing." And in that simple gesture, passing her a bottle of water, speaking gently, offering attention without condition, something shifted between them. It wasn't romantic yet, but it was a connection, fragile and real, a recognition that both of them were more than the roles they played in the world. She, a bride trapped by obligation. He, a billionaire trapped by routine and expectation. Lila took a sip, the cold water a small comfort against the heat of her nerves. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I've spent so long doing what I thought was right for everyone else, and no one ever stopped to just see me, not really see me." Julian nodded, eyes on the road but heart listening. Sometimes people are blind to what's right in front of them. They get caught up in appearances, expectations, everything that doesn't matter. For the first time, Lila felt safe enough to let a tiny fragment of herself out. She laughed softly, a little broken, but genuine. "I didn't expect to meet someone today who actually cares. And I certainly didn't expect it to be a billionaire on a highway." Julian smiled faintly, a rare, unguarded smile. "I didn't plan to stop," he admitted. "But sometimes the universe has a way of rearranging our priorities. You never know which small act will change everything." The silence returned, but it was no longer heavy. It was a comfortable pause, a shared understanding. And as the car rolled along the winding road, the viewers watching could almost feel the tension between courage and fear, hope and uncertainty. Julian's mind drifted again to the life he had built. Rigid schedules, endless meetings, cold victories. None of it had brought him this feeling, this quiet satisfaction that came from simply being present for someone else. He realized how rare it was to care so purely, without calculation, without strategy. And then, almost on impulse, he spoke again. "You know, whatever happens at your wedding, whatever you decide, I want you to remember something. Your choices matter. Your happiness matters. Don't ever forget that." Lila's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. The weight she carried lightened, if only slightly, by his words. She nodded slowly, absorbing sincerity in his voice. And in that moment, A silent promise formed between them, a promise that this ride, this detour, was more than just a journey to a wedding. It was a beginning of change. As the sun dipped lower and the road stretched ahead, Julian and Lila continued forward, not just toward a wedding that may never be, but toward choices, courage, and the possibility of something neither of them had expected, a connection that could alter the course of their lives forever. The sky had deepened into a rich indigo, streaked with the first hints of stars. The road stretched ahead, quiet now, except for the steady hum of the car and the occasional whisper of wind through the open windows. Lila leaned back in her seat, her hands resting in her lap, but her mind was racing. Every mile brought her closer to a wedding she didn't want, a life she hadn't chosen, and the weight of that reality pressed harder than ever. Julian noticed the tension immediately, the way her shoulders stiffened, her jaw tight, the subtle trembling of her fingers. He knew this wasn't just fatigue. It was a fear of losing control over her own life. "You're quiet," he said gently, glancing at her. "What's going through your mind?" Lila's blue eyes darted to him, a flicker of panic crossing her face. I just realized how little time I have," she admitted. "Every minute that passes, I'm getting closer to saying I do to someone I don't love. I feel like I'm running out of options, Julian, running out of time." Julian's chest tightened. He had hoped the ride would bring some relief, a moment of calm before the storm. But now the storm was here, quiet and inevitable, and he could see it reflected in her eyes. "You're not out of options," he said firmly. "Not yet. Whatever they've told you, whatever pressures you feel, you still have a choice. You just have to be brave enough to take it." Her hands clutched the ribbon of her bouquet tightly, the petals crumpling under the strain. "It's not that simple. My family, they're counting on me. If I refuse, they'll lose everything. And Her voice broke, and for a moment, she was just a frightened 25-year-old girl, not the composed bride the world expected. Julian reached over, just enough to let her feel the steadiness of his presence. "Lila," he said softly, "I don't know everything you're going through, but I do know this. You don't have to face it alone. And you don't have to live someone else's life at the cost of your own happiness." She swallowed, fighting back tears. "But what if I fail? What if my decision ruins everything?" "You won't fail," he replied. "Courage isn't about knowing the outcome. It's about taking the step anyway." The tension hung in the air, thick and almost suffocating. Outside, the highway was quiet, empty, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And in that quiet, the reality of the situation became undeniable. The closer they got to the wedding, the harder it would be to change anything. Then, almost instinctively, Julian asked, "If we could take a detour, somewhere safe, somewhere you think clearly, would you go?" Her eyes widened. "You'd do that for me?" "I'm not asking," he said, voice calm but firm. "I'm telling. Sometimes the only way forward is to step off the path everyone expects you to take." For a moment, Lila simply stared out the window, the city lights far behind them, reflecting in her eyes. And as the stars began to pierce the twilight sky, a sense of possibility flickered. A tiny ember of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she didn't have to surrender her life to duty alone. The car moved forward, each mile stretching the tension between fear and courage. For Lila, every heartbeat was a countdown to a life she didn't want. For Julian, every mile reminded him why he had stopped that day, why he had chosen to offer her more than a ride, why he had chosen to stand beside her. Little did they know, the first real conflict wasn't just about the wedding. It was about choices, consequences, and the courage to stand for oneself in a world determined to demand otherwise. The night had fully settled in, a deep velvet sky, scattered with stars stretching endlessly above the highway. The world outside was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the tires against asphalt. But inside the car, tension hung thick like a storm waiting to break. Lila glanced at Julian, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap, clutching the ribbon of her bouquet. Every mile brought her closer to a wedding she didn't want, closer to a life she hadn't chosen, and yet farther from the freedom she secretly craved. Then it happened. Her phone buzzed, a message from her family. She hesitated, knowing the words would push her even further toward the inevitable. Yet curiosity, fear, and obligation compelled her to read. Lila, the wedding cannot be delayed. Everyone is counting on you. We're depending on you. The words hit her like a blow, cold and heavy. She felt the weight of generations pressing down, the invisible chains of duty tightening around her chest. Her fingers trembled as she set the phone down, the bouquet slipping slightly from her lap. Julian noticed immediately. "Family?" he asked softly. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. They can't survive without me. If I don't go through with this, everything falls apart. And her voice cracked, swallowed by despair. "I don't know if I can do it." Julian exhaled, the weight of her confession settling over him. He had expected fear, uncertainty, even hesitation, but the sheer intensity of her burden struck him in a way he hadn't anticipated. His mind raced, not with strategy or business, but with something far rarer, the desire to protect, to guide, to intervene. "Lila," he said finally, voice calm but firm, "look at me. You have a choice. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you do. This isn't about obligation. It's about what you're willing to risk for yourself. And sometimes the risk is worth it." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I have to think about them. I can't be selfish." "Selfish?" Julian asked gently. "You're not being selfish. You're being human. Your family will survive because of you, not because you sacrifice your entire life. You have to live too, Lila. You can't give up who you are for anyone, even for those you love." The car continued down the empty highway, the stars above like silent witnesses to their conversation. Lila's chest heaved, each word Julian spoke cutting to the fear and doubt that held her captive for so long. And then, almost instinctively, he asked, "Do you want to turn around? Drive somewhere safe just for the night? No decisions, no obligations. Just you." Her eyes widened in shock. "You do that?" "I'm not asking," he said quietly. "I'm offering. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is to choose yourself, but you don't have to do it alone." For a long moment, silence fell between them. The only sound was the steady hum of the car, the soft breeze brushing against the windows. Lila stared out at the night, heart pounding, mind racing. And in that silence, a spark of clarity ignited. The decision was no longer theoretical. The turning point had arrived. She could continue down the path laid out for her, or she could take a detour into the unknown, guided by someone who saw her, truly saw her, for the first time in her life. Lila inhaled deeply, feeling the first taste of courage in months, maybe years. Julian glanced at her, giving her the space to decide, knowing that whatever choice she made tonight could change everything. Little did they know, this moment, the first real chance to defy fear and expectation, would ripple forward, forcing decisions, revealing hearts, and setting the stage for consequences neither of them could have imagined. The car rolled along the quiet road, headlights cutting through the darkness like twin beacons of possibility. Lila's hands rested on her lap, trembling but determined. The fear she had carried for months, years even, was there, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. Tonight, she would face the truth. Julian noticed the shift immediately. There was resolve in her posture, a fire in her eyes that had been absent when he first picked her up on the roadside. She wasn't just a scared bride anymore. She was someone ready to reclaim her life. "You're sure about this?" he asked gently, glancing at her. "It's going to be difficult. People won't understand." "I don't care if they understand," Lila said, voice stronger than it had been all day. "This isn't about them. It's about me. I've spent too long doing what everyone else wanted. Tonight, I do what I want." Julian's hand hovered near hers, a quiet gesture of support, not control. "Then let's make it happen. Step by step together." The tension in the car was electric. Every mile they traveled felt like a heartbeat closer to confrontation, not just with others, but with the fears and doubts that had chained her for so long. Lila's mind raced, replaying every moment she had tried to please everyone else, every tear she had swallowed, every word she had left unsaid. Tonight, none of that mattered. They arrived at the wedding venue, the lights glowing softly in the night, signaling the expectations, the obligations, the life she had been trying to escape. Lila stepped out of the car, Julian close behind, and the cold night air wrapped around her like a warning and a promise at once. She could hear the distant hum of preparations, the murmur of guests, the click of heels against polished floors. It all seemed unreal. The life she had been dragged toward, the role she had been forced to play. But for the first time, she felt clarity. She took a deep breath, feeling Julian's steady presence beside her. Then, with a courage she didn't know she still had, she walked toward the doors. Each step was heavy with anticipation, each heartbeat a drumbeat of defiance. Inside, the world awaited, ready to pull her back into obligations and expectations. But Lila was ready to confront it, ready to speak the truth. She would face her family, her groom, and the entire life that had been planned for her, and she would say what needed to be said. And as she approached, Julian whispered just for her ears, "No matter what happens, you're not alone. You have a choice and you're taking it." Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and in that glance, the world seemed to pause. The audience watching could feel it. The tension, the courage, the pivotal moment when fear met determination. And here's a question for everyone watching. Have you ever had to confront the truth, even when it scared you? How did it feel to finally stand up for yourself? Share in the comments. Lila stepped forward, and with that, the confrontation began, not just with her family or her obligations, but with the expectations that had held her captive for so long. It was terrifying, it was uncertain, and it was the most liberating moment of her life. Little did she know, this confrontation wouldn't just change her life. It would alter Julian's too, drawing them both into a story of courage, love, and the unexpected ways two lives can collide. The doors of the grand hall loomed ahead, glittering with chandeliers, laughter, and the hum of expectation. Inside, everyone awaited, the family, the groom, the guests, all ready for a ceremony Lila had never wanted. But tonight, she wasn't a frightened girl who felt trapped by duty. Tonight, she had made a choice. Julian stood quietly behind her, a calm anchor in a storm of nerves. He hadn't planned this. No billionaire could. But somehow, by stopping for her on the roadside, he had become part of her courage, part of the force that would finally help her stand for herself. She inhaled deeply, feeling the familiar weight of fear, then let it pass. Every heartbeat pulsed with defiance, with determination, with the knowledge that this night belonged to her, not to anyone else. The first few steps inside were electric. Conversations hushed, eyes turned toward her, and whispers filled the air. But Lila didn't falter. She walked forward, head held high, eyes blazing with resolve. Her family's expressions were a mix of shock and disbelief. Lila, her mother started, voice trembling. "This isn't you can't." "This is me," Lila interrupted, steady and unwavering. "This is my choice. I am not marrying him. I will not live a life I didn't choose. I love my family, yes, but I cannot sacrifice myself for what others want. I have to live for me now." The room fell silent. Every eye fixed on her. Some were shocked, some angry, some in disbelief. But she didn't care. She felt the freedom in speaking the truth, the release that came from standing firm in her own voice. Julian stepped closer, offering quiet support, a subtle reassurance that she was not alone. And in that moment, Lila felt something she hadn't in years: empowerment. Real, undeniable empowerment. And here's a question for everyone watching. Have you ever had to choose yourself over what others expected? Would you have the courage to do what Lila just did? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you'd choose. The groom's face was pale, the guests murmuring in disbelief. But Lila's focus didn't waver. She had taken the hardest step, the first step toward freedom, and nothing could pull her back now. Julian smiled softly, pride and admiration mingling in his eyes. He had seen her fear, her heartbreak, and her courage. And now, he witnessed her triumph, the courage to defy expectation, to seize control of her own life. The night air outside felt lighter, freer, as if the universe itself had breathed with her. She had chosen freedom. And in doing so, she had rewritten the rules of her own story. Little did they know, this choice wasn't just a personal victory. It would reshape the path ahead for both of them, creating space for love, trust, and the possibility of a life lived on their own terms. The night had grown quiet, the chaos of expectations left behind in the grand hall. Lila stepped outside, the cool breeze brushing against her face, carrying with it the sweet, freeing scent of possibility. She had chosen herself. She had chosen her freedom. Julian followed silently, hands tucked into his pockets, eyes softened by admiration. He didn't need to speak. The quiet between them was filled with understanding. The road that had brought them here, the roadside encounter, the miles of shared stories, the detours of courage, had changed both of them. Lila let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time in years, she felt light, unburdened, and fully alive. She glanced at Julian, and in that glance was gratitude, relief, and a flicker of something tender she hadn't expected. "You did it," Julian said softly. "You stood for yourself. That takes more courage than anyone will ever know." Lila smiled, a genuine, radiant smile, no longer shadowed by fear. "I couldn't have done it alone," she admitted. He shrugged, almost shyly. "Sometimes it's not about doing it alone. It's about having someone who believes in you, even when you're afraid to believe in yourself." The city lights glimmered in the distance, reflections dancing on the sleek surface of his car. The world felt wide open, full of unspoken promises and unwritten stories. And for the first time, both of them sensed that life wasn't about following a script. It was about creating it one brave choice at a time. As they drove away from the wedding venue, the horizon glowing softly with the first hints of dawn, a fragile new beginning emerged, not perfect, not certain, but real. A beginning built on courage, honesty, and the unspoken bond between two people who had met at just the right moment. If you felt Lila and Julian's journey in your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV for more stories that touch the soul. Hit the like button, share this video, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story of courage, love, and unexpected life-changing moments. Remember, every story has a choice, and every choice has the power to change a life. Sometimes yours, sometimes someone else's,